name is Irina Cook, and I was 32 the night my brother slid a glossy rehab brochure across my parents' dining table and told me I was out of control. We were sitting in my childhood home in Oak Park, Illinois. The Sunday dinner had gone quiet. My mother was staring fixedly at her cooling plate. My brother Harrison leaned forward in a tailored charcoal suit, his voice heavy with rehearsed pity, and handed me the paperwork to sign away my legal rights. I did not shout. I did not defend myself. I just left the pen on the wood and walked out into the cold. But what I did over the next few weeks, and what my 81-year-old grandmother did quietly behind closed doors, is the reason a county judge would eventually stare down from the bench and order a bailiff to hand my brother over for criminal indictment. Welcome back to Revenge Order, where entitled families meet their match and quiet people bring the receipts. If you have ever been accused of a lie just so someone else could steal your place, you belong here. Drop a comment, let us know your age and where you are listening from. And be sure to subscribe. Let me take you back to that dining room. The house smelled like roasted garlic and tension. The brochure Harrison pushed toward me landed with a soft hiss. Serenity Peaks Recovery Center, the gold letters read. He placed a cheap plastic blue pen right beside it. "We know about the pills, Irina," he said. He pitched his voice low, trying to sound like a television therapist. "We are doing this because we love you. You need an intervention." I sat perfectly still. I am a corporate compliance analyst. I spend my days hunting for hidden liabilities in financial contracts. I have not swallowed a basic painkiller in 3 years, and I drink a single glass of wine on holidays. I watched my mother's hands shake as she rearranged her napkin. She refused to look at me. "Just sign the intake forms, Irina," she whispered. Denying a fabricated accusation only gives it room to breathe. So I did what I do at work. I read the fine print. The pages were thick, expensive stock. I flipped past the cover. Page 1 consisted of standard medical releases. Page 2 detailed insurance disclosures. Then came page 3. Buried near the bottom, disguised beneath a benign heading labeled Patient Proxy Authorization, was the trap. It was not a standard medical proxy. It was a temporary financial conservatorship clause. Affixing my signature to that line would grant Harrison full signatory power over my checking accounts, my retirement, and my legal standing the exact moment I checked into the facility. Harrison pressed his thumb against the clicker of the pen. Snap, snap, snap. It was a frantic, irregular metronome. His knuckles pulled taut, flashing white against the plastic. He always gripped his pens like that when a lie was threatening to unravel. "It is for your own good," he repeated. "Let me handle your affairs while you get clean." I looked at the blue pen, then up at my brother. A thin sheen of sweat at his hairline betrayed the expensive tailoring. I stood up. I did not overturn my chair or demand an apology. I simply set the packet down, left his plastic pen where it lay, and walked toward the front door. The autumn Chicago wind bit through my coat as I keyed the ignition of my sedan. Merging onto Lakeshore Drive, the initial shock faded, replaced by a cold, surgical clarity. Harrison was running a tech startup. I knew his overhead was high and his revenue was thin. He did not want my money. My modest savings would not cover a single month of his payroll. He needed real capital. He needed me legally incapacitated, branded a volatile addict. Because if a judge deemed me unfit to manage my own checking account, I would be legally disqualified from my primary role in this family. I am the sole executor of our grandmother Beatrice's estate. He was not staging an intervention. He was clearing the board. The morning light filtered through the blinds of my condo, casting long, pale shadows across the kitchen island. I stood at the counter and measured exact scoops of dark roast into the coffee grinder. Precision grounds me. In the Cook family, there has always been a clear, unspoken division of labor. Harrison was the loud visionary. He spent his 20s pitching ideas in glass boardrooms, wearing expensive sneakers, talking endlessly about paradigm shifts and disrupting markets. I was the human calculator. I read the risk assessment reports. I fixed the messy tax filings he left behind, and I kept the ledgers clean. Pouring the hot water over the grounds, I opened my laptop. The encounter from the previous night replayed in my mind, stripped of any lingering emotional shock. Harrison is arrogant and entitled, but he is not naturally stupid. Attempting to frame a senior compliance analyst for severe substance abuse is an incredibly high-risk maneuver. I document financial realities for a living. I leave a pristine paper trail everywhere I go. To attack someone whose entire profession relies on verifiable truth meant my brother was not operating from a place of strategy. He was operating from a place of raw, unadulterated terror. I set my mug down and logged into a restricted public records database I utilize for corporate audits. I needed to understand the exact shape of his panic. I pulled the corporate filings for his latest venture, a logistics software company he had been boasting about at family holidays for 2 years. The surface-level search displayed a sleek website and old press releases praising his innovation, but digging into the Uniform Commercial Code filings revealed a vastly different reality. The foundation of his company was rotting from the inside out. Traditional banking institutions had cut him off months ago. His credit lines were tapped. Faced with a failing enterprise, he had turned to alternative financing, shadow lenders. These are unregulated entities that provide fast capital at predatory interest rates, demanding personal collateral when the business assets are not enough. I found the most recent lien filed against his corporate and personal holdings, $300,000. The maturation date was explicitly listed on the public docket. He had exactly 72 hours before the lenders could legally seize everything he owned. Panic makes arrogant men incredibly sloppy. He needed liquid cash fast, and our grandmother Beatrice possessed a trust portfolio that could cover his debt 10 times over without making a dent in her principal. But Beatrice is a careful woman. She survived the financial turbulence of the 1970s by reading the fine print. She assigned me as her sole executor and financial power of attorney 3 years ago, specifically because she trusts my caution. She recognized that Harrison viewed money as a stage prop, while I viewed it as a tool for security. To get his hands on her money, Harrison had to remove me from the equation. He needed to convince Beatrice I was a dangerous liability, an addict spiraling out of control and draining my own accounts. I knew my grandmother loved me, but fear is a highly effective manipulator. If Harrison showed up at her house in Naperville, shedding fake tears and spinning a desperate tale about me pawning furniture for pills, the sheer shock might make her sign a temporary proxy just to protect the family assets. He would frame it as saving me from myself. I closed the laptop and drank the black coffee. I refused to play defense emotionally. Pleading my innocence to my mother or my grandmother would only sound like the manic denial of an actual addict. I do not deal in feelings or tearful promises. I deal in rigorous documentation. If my brother wanted to build a false narrative, I would build an impenetrable paper fortress. I picked up my phone and researched an independent forensic toxicology laboratory located downtown. I did not ask the automated system for a standard employment screening. I dialed the direct line and ordered a legally admissible 12-panel hair follicle and urine test. A basic urine screen only proves sobriety for the past few days. A hair follicle test, however, provides a permanent biological ledger. It proves absolute sobriety for the past 90 days. It tests for opiates, amphetamines, barbiturates, and every synthetic compound in between. This type of forensic testing requires a strict chain of custody. A licensed medical technician takes the sample, seals it in tamper-evident packaging, and signs a sworn affidavit of collection. It is the exact standard of proof required by a federal court of law. I booked the first available appointment for 10 o'clock that morning. The drive to the clinic was quiet. I listened to the steady hum of the tires against the pavement and watched the Chicago skyline sharpen against the autumn sky. I felt a strange, cold sense of calm settling over my shoulders. The truth is a reliable shield, but only if you know exactly how to wield it. Harrison thought he could steamroll me with an emotional ambush at a dining room table. He assumed I would crumble under the weight of our mother's disappointed silence. He underestimated the sheer focus it takes to sit in a room full of liars and simply walk away to gather ammunition. The laboratory waiting room smelled of industrial bleach and old magazines. A television mounted in the corner played a morning news program on mute. I walked up to the reception desk. A woman, sitting behind a thick pane of plexiglass, slid a plastic clipboard toward me. She asked for my government-issued photo identification and instructed me to fill out the chain of custody authorization. I filled out the forms using a black pen from my purse. My handwriting was sharp and perfectly level. I checked the specific box requesting certified copies of the results be sent directly to my personal email and my home address. The receptionist reviewed the paperwork and nodded, tracking my data into her system. "That will be $350 out of pocket," she said, tapping the edge of her keyboard. "We do not process health insurance for private forensic requests." I pulled my leather wallet from my bag. I retrieved my primary debit card and slid the plastic across the sterile counter. I watched her insert the chip into the payment terminal. My mind was already calculating the logistics of the afternoon. I figured out how fast I could drive out to the Naperville suburbs to present the receipts to Beatrice once the test was officially logged. I wanted to be sitting in her living room before Harrison even woke up. The terminal chimed. It was a sharp, flat sound that echoed slightly in the quiet waiting area. The receptionist frowned and pulled the card out of the slot. She wiped the gold chip on the sleeve of her scrubs and inserted it into the machine a second time. We waited in silence. The machine chimed again, emitting the same flat tone. "I am sorry," she said, pushing the card back under the gap in the plexiglass. Her tone carried the polite, practiced sympathy of someone used to declining transactions. "The system says the card is restricted." My pulse executed a slow, heavy tick against my throat. I keep a generous buffer in that specific checking account. It is where my corporate salary deposits bi-weekly. I pulled out my phone and opened my mobile banking application using the biometric scanner. The screen loaded, displaying my account dashboard. The available balance read 0. Right below the balance, a small red banner glowed across the digital screen. The text was brief and undeniable. "Account frozen, pending external legal review." Harrison had not waited for me to react to the intervention packet. He had taken my refusal to sign as the starting gun. Using his status as a concerned immediate family member, he had clearly filed a temporary emergency medical hold, citing severe crisis. He had already struck the first blow. The red banner on my banking application glowed like a warning beacon in the sterile clinic lobby. I stood at the reception counter staring at the word frozen. This was the terrifying velocity of a well-constructed lie. A family member citing an active medical crisis can trigger automatic institutional safeguards designed to prevent a vulnerable person from draining their own assets. Harrison had weaponized the very system meant to protect people. By filing a temporary 48-hour medical hold, he had effectively locked my funds without needing a judge to sign a formal order. He had stranded me. The receptionist watched me from behind the plexiglass, her expression shifting from polite detachment to quiet suspicion. People who cannot afford out-of-pocket drug tests generally fall into specific categories, and none of those categories project reliability. I felt the sudden, isolating weight of the narrative my brother was building. If I walked out of the clinic right now without taking the test, his lie would gain traction. Every hour that passed without verifiable medical proof was an hour Harrison could use to poison my grandmother against me. I did not let my hands shake. I locked my phone screen and offered the receptionist a small, composed smile. "Please hold my paperwork for a moment," I said, keeping my voice entirely level. "My corporate fraud department is currently upgrading our security protocols, and my card appears to be caught in the transition flag. I will retrieve another form of payment from my vehicle." I turned and walked out the glass doors, maintaining a steady, unhurried pace. The autumn wind hit my face, but I barely registered the chill. I reached my sedan, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. Sitting in the quiet confines of the car, the reality of the situation closed in. Harrison was attempting to suffocate me financially, so I could not afford the tools to fight back. He believed taking away my debit card would force me into submission or drive me into a frantic emotional spiral. He forgot who he was dealing with. He forgot that cleaning up his financial wreckage for the past decade had taught me to never rely on a single point of failure. I leaned across the center console and unlatched the glove box. Beneath the vehicle registration manual and a stack of maintenance receipts sat a slim, unmarked black envelope. I pulled it out and opened the flap. Inside rested 4 crisp $100 bills. I started keeping an emergency cash reserve hidden in my vehicle years ago. It began when Harrison mismanaged the payroll for his very first startup and begged me to cover the bounced checks for his entry-level developers. I learned early that when the banking systems fail or when a family member decides to rewrite the rules, having untraceable liquid currency is the only true safety net. Harrison viewed cash as something to immediately leverage or invest. I view it as armor. I counted the bills, folding them neatly into my palm. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of leather and cold air ground me. I was not a victim caught in a trap. I was an analyst examining a compromised structure. My brother had cut off my primary supply line, but he had failed to secure the perimeter. I stepped out of the sedan and walked back into the clinic. The receptionist raised her eyebrows as I approached the counter. I laid the $400 bills flat on the surface, sliding them under the plexiglass gap. I believe this should cover the forensic screening and the expedited processing fee, I said. Her skepticism vanished, replaced by the transactional efficiency of the medical industry. She processed the cash, handed me a receipt stamped "paid in full," and directed me toward the clinical staging area. The testing process itself was rigorous and entirely devoid of dignity. A medical technician with a bored expression snipped a precise cluster of hair from the nape of my neck, sealing it inside a clear plastic vial. I then provided the urine sample under strict monitored protocols. Every container was labeled, initialed, and locked into a tamper-evident transport bag right in front of me. I watched the technician sign the sworn chain of custody affidavit. The ink drying on that paper was the first solid brick in my fortress. "We will expedite the panel," the technician said, handing me the pink carbon copy of the intake form. "Because you requested forensic certification, the final results will be securely emailed to your designated address by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." I thanked him, tucked the pink copy into my leather bag, and walked out of the facility. The mid-morning traffic on the street had thickened. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. I had secured the biological ledger. By tomorrow morning, I would possess a notarized medical document proving absolute sobriety for the past 90 days. No amount of fake tears or concerned family interventions could argue with a forensic laboratory analysis. I had survived the first wave of his assault. I unlocked my car door, feeling the adrenaline begin to level out. I planned to drive straight to my office, log into my secure network, and begin drafting a formal cease and desist letter to hand to a lawyer. I wanted to put Harrison's intimidation tactics on the legal record immediately. Before I could even put the key in the ignition, my cell phone began to vibrate violently in the cup holder. I glanced at the screen. The caller identification displayed the main switchboard number for my employer. A call from the main desk during standard business hours usually meant a misrouted client inquiry or a minor vendor dispute. I pressed the accept button and brought the receiver to my ear. "Irina Cook speaking," I said, shifting into my professional register. "Irina, this is Marcus Vance," the voice on the other end replied. The satisfaction drained from your body instantly. Marcus Vance was not a client coordinator. He was the director of human resources for our entire regional division. He was a man who only made direct phone calls when a serious corporate violation was actively unfolding. "I need you to return to the building immediately," Irina Marcus said. His tone was stripped of its usual corporate warmth, leaving only a hard, flat directive. "Do not log into the remote server. Do not access any client portfolios. We have secured a private conference room on the executive floor, and we need you here in exactly 20 minutes. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. I kept my voice neutral, suppressing the sudden spike of genuine fear. Is there a specific issue with my current audit cycle, Marcus? I asked. There has been a report filed, Marcus replied, the hesitation in his voice signaling profound discomfort. An external report regarding your fitness for duty and your handling of sensitive client data. We are required by the State Regulatory Board to suspend your access protocols pending a formal review. Just get here, Irina. We need to have a very difficult conversation. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, staring at the dark screen. Harrison had not stopped at freezing my personal bank accounts. He knew taking my money would only slow me down. He needed to destroy my credibility entirely. He had escalated the lie to a professional assassination. The drive into the downtown financial district felt like navigating a slow-moving current. The midday Chicago traffic crawled along the concrete grid, but my mind raced ahead, dissecting the exact nature of the threat. In the corporate finance sector, your reputation is your primary currency. My compliance license is a federal seal of trust earned through years of rigorous examinations and spotless background checks. It is the legal permission slip that allows me to audit multi-million-dollar portfolios. If the State Regulatory Board revokes that license, you do not just lose your current job, you are exiled from the industry permanently. Harrison knew this. He had aimed a weapon directly at my earning potential, ensuring I would have zero resources left to fight him for our grandmother's estate. I pulled into the subterranean parking garage beneath my office tower. The concrete walls echoed with the low hum of luxury engines and exhaust fans. I walked toward the private elevator banks, smoothing the lapels of my blazer. I needed to project total, unwavering stability. I approached the glass security turnstiles and pressed my employee identification badge against the optical reader. Instead of the familiar green chime, the scanner emitted a harsh red buzz. The thick glass doors remained locked. A security guard named David stepped out from behind the marble reception desk. He looked deeply uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His eyes avoided mine, focusing somewhere near my shoulder. "I am sorry, Irina," he said, his voice hushed to prevent the passing executives from hearing. "Human Resources deactivated your badge about 20 minutes ago. I have strict instructions to escort you directly to the third-floor conference room." The humiliation was immediate and designed to be public. Being escorted through your own corporate lobby by a uniformed guard is the universal signal of a terminated employee. I felt a tight ache settle in my ribs, but I kept my chin level. I nodded once and followed him to the guest elevator. The third floor houses the executive suites and the internal legal department. The air up here always smells faintly of expensive coffee and floor wax. David led me down a silent, carpeted corridor and opened the heavy oak door of Conference Room B. Marcus Vance sat at the head of a long, polished mahogany table. Beside him sat Eleanor Hayes, the senior internal counsel for our regional division. A thick manila folder rested between them. The atmosphere in the room was dense and suffocating. Marcus gestured to the empty leather chair opposite him. "Please sit down, Irina," he said. I took the seat, placing my leather bag on the floor next to my ankle. I folded my hands on the cool surface of the table and waited. In any compliance audit, the person who speaks first is usually the one who reveals their weak points. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to initiate the uncomfortable dialogue. Eleanor cleared her throat and opened the manila folder. "An hour ago, our firm received an urgent notification from the State Regulatory Oversight Committee," she began. Her tone was clinical and detached, the voice of a lawyer mitigating corporate risk. "They received an anonymous tip this morning via their whistleblower hotline. The caller provided your exact employee identification number and claimed you have been actively processing sensitive client financial data while severely impaired by unprescribed narcotics." Marcus leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. "Irina, you know our industry strictures better than anyone," he said. "A tip like this triggers an automatic internal audit. We possess a fiduciary duty to our clients. If there is even a fraction of a % of truth to this allegation, we are exposed to catastrophic federal penalties. We have to suspend your access protocols immediately, pending a formal medical investigation." They watched my face, waiting for the breakdown. When confronted with sudden career-ending allegations, most professionals panic. They cry, they shout, they hire aggressive defense attorneys and threaten wrongful termination lawsuits. They let their emotions validate the accusation. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice to defend my moral character. I looked at the condensation gathering on the outside of Marcus' water glass, and I applied the exact principles of my profession. I managed the risk. I reached down into my bag and retrieved the pink carbon copy of the chain of custody receipt I had obtained 30 minutes prior. I slid the stiff paper across the mahogany table until it rested directly on top of Eleanor's manila folder. "I understand your position, Marcus," I said, keeping my pitch even and low. "You are following the mandated risk mitigation matrix. However, you are operating on manipulated data." The anonymous caller was my estranged brother, Harrison Cook. He is currently facing severe insolvency with his latest venture, and he is attempting to orchestrate a fraudulent financial conservatorship over my personal assets to access our family trust. Eleanor picked up the pink receipt, her eyes scanning the official stamps and the printed time codes. When he realized I would not comply with his demands, he escalated his extortion tactics to target my employment. I continued. He is attempting to sever my income to prevent me from retaining legal counsel. That receipt in your hand, Eleanor, is from an independent forensic toxicology laboratory. It is time-stamped for 10 o'clock this morning. It represents a legally admissible 12-panel hair follicle and urine screening conducted under strict federal chain of custody protocols. Marcus looked at Eleanor, who gave a slow, subtle nod. The date and the medical facility credentials were unmistakable. "I expect the certified negative results to be delivered to my secure email by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," I said. "I will forward the verified laboratory report directly to your internal secure server the moment it arrives. Until then, I am officially notifying this firm that my brother is engaging in tortious interference with my employment contract." I held Marcus' gaze. The corporate dynamics shifted in the room. I was no longer an accused employee begging for mercy. I was a senior analyst, reporting an external security threat. Under Section 4 of our Corporate Employee Protection Bylaws, the firm is obligated to shield its staff from targeted external harassment, I said. I am requesting that Harrison Cook be permanently added to the building security ban list. If he attempts to contact the switchboard again, the calls must be routed directly to the legal department and logged as evidence of ongoing defamation. Marcus sat back in his chair, the tension bleeding out of his shoulders. The human resources director realized he was not dealing with a volatile addict. He was dealing with a meticulously prepared professional who knew the employee handbook better than he did. Eleanor closed the manila folder and handed the pink receipt back to me. "This changes the landscape considerably, Irina," she said, her tone warming slightly. "We still have to maintain the suspension of your access protocols today. The regulatory board requires a documented pause in activity whenever a tip is processed. However, if you provide that certified negative forensic report tomorrow morning, we will reinstate your credentials immediately, and our legal department will handle the regulatory board response on your behalf." "Thank you, Eleanor," I said. I stood up, picking up my bag. "I will see you both tomorrow at 8:30. I walked out of the conference room and navigated the hallway alone. My badge remained inactive, so David, the security guard, had to swipe me through the exit turnstiles. I stepped out onto the busy Chicago pavement, feeling the heavy crash of adrenaline receding from my bloodstream. I had survived the professional assassination attempt. My career was secure for another 24 hours. I drove the long route back to my neighborhood, letting the rhythm of the traffic soothe my frayed nerves. Harrison had deployed his two strongest weapons in a single morning. He had frozen my bank accounts, and he had attempted to sever my livelihood. He was moving with terrifying speed, trying to break my spirit before I could assemble a defense. But I had outmaneuvered his corporate sabotage. I parked my sedan in my designated spot and walked up the steps to my condominium building. Exhaustion settled deep into my bones. I wanted nothing more than to unlock my door, brew a cup of herbal tea, and draft a timeline of events for a lawyer. I stepped out of the elevator onto my floor. The corridor was quiet, lined with muted lighting and neutral wallpaper. I turned the corner toward my unit. My mother, Diane, was standing in the hallway directly in front of my door. She wore her expensive cashmere trench coat pulled tight around her waist, holding a designer handbag with a white-knuckled grip. Her mascara was smeared beneath her eyes, leaving dark, jagged tracks down her cheeks. Her breathing was ragged and shallow, echoing in the empty corridor. She was crying, but as I approached and read the rigid posture of her shoulders, I realized these were not tears of relief or maternal concern. These were tears of sheer, profound panic. She had not come to my home to apologize for the ambush at the dinner table. She had come because the lie was spinning out of control, and she needed me to surrender. I unlocked the deadbolt and pushed the heavy wooden door open. Diane brushed past me, stepping into the narrow entryway without waiting for an invitation. The scent of her expensive floral perfume mixed with the damp chill of the autumn afternoon, carrying a sour undercurrent of nervous sweat. She dropped her designer handbag onto the entryway console. The metal hardware hit the polished wood with a sharp clatter. I closed the door, sealing us inside the quiet space of my home. I expected her to start with an apology. A parent cornering her daughter after participating in a fabricated intervention usually comes armed with a rehearsed speech filled with excuses or tearful regrets. I walked into the kitchen and set my keys on the counter. I did not offer her a glass of water or a cup of tea. I leaned against the marble island, crossing my arms, and waited for her to present her defense. Diane did not apologize. She walked straight into my living room, her leather heels sinking into the wool area rug. She began to pace. She moved from the floor-to-ceiling window to the edge of the sofa, touching the corners of the furniture like a trapped bird looking for a compromised wire in a cage. She picked up a set of stone beverage coasters, restacked them into a precise column, and set them back down. Her frantic energy was a physical presence, altering the air pressure in the room. "You have to drop this, Irina," she said, her voice tight and breathless. She stopped pacing and turned to face me. Her mascara was smeared beneath her lower lashes, leaving dark, jagged tracks down her pale cheeks. I kept my voice perfectly level. "Drop the fact that my brother tried to frame me for severe substance abuse to steal my legal standing," I asked. Diane waved a hand through the air as if swatting away a trivial nuisance. "We both know you are not an addict," she said, the admission tumbling out of her mouth with terrifying ease. "Harrison overreacted. He is under an immense amount of pressure right now. He thought if he could just take over your proxy temporarily, he could fix everything without causing a permanent rift." I stared at her, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. The chilling reality of her statement hung in the silent room. A mother was openly admitting she had been willing to sacrifice one child's professional reputation and personal liberty simply to coddle the other child's bruised ego. She had sat at that dining room table and watched him hand me a conservatorship packet, knowing every single word of it was a calculated lie. "It is not an overreaction to forge a medical crisis mother," I said. "It is extortion. He owes unregulated shadow lenders $300,000. His logistics company is an empty shell. I ran the public filings this morning." Diane flinched as if I had struck her. The defensive posture vanished, replaced by the slump of a truly defeated woman. She collapsed onto the edge of the sofa, burying her face in her manicured hands. A low, ragged sob escaped her throat. "It is worse than that," she whispered. Her voice was muffled, trembling with a profound underlying terror. "The lenders are not just threatening to seize his business assets, Irina. They are going to take my house." The air in the condo went perfectly still. I looked at the woman sitting on my sofa, and the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with sickening clarity. Diane was not just a passive bystander watching her son self-destruct. She was a co-conspirator chained directly to the sinking ship. "You leveraged the Oak Park property," I said, the statement landing as a cold, hard fact rather than a question. She lifted her head, her eyes red and desperate. 18 months ago, he begged me for a round of seed funding," she confessed, the words rushing out in a rapid stream of guilt. "He promised the software was 6 months away from a massive public offering. The traditional banks refused to extend his credit lines. I signed a reverse mortgage on the family home to give him the capital. I thought I was investing in his future. But the development costs spiraled, and then he took out the secondary bridge loans from those awful men to cover the deficit. If Harrison defaults on Friday, they foreclose on me. I will be out on the street. Enablers operate much like bad debt. They compound the initial error by throwing good money after bad, convinced the next desperate gamble will somehow balance the ledger. Diane had risked her own shelter to fund his delusion. Now that the bill was due, she was demanding I offer up our grandmother as the final sacrificial lamb. "You have a steady corporate job, Irina," she pleaded, leaning forward on the sofa. "You rent a beautiful, secure condominium. You do not need Grandma's money to survive. Harrison just needs a temporary capital injection from the estate trust. He will pay it back with interest once the market stabilizes. Just step aside, renounce your position as executor, and let him assume the power of attorney. It will save our family." I felt a wave of profound revulsion. The normalization of theft had eroded the very foundation of my family. They viewed Beatrice not as an 81-year-old woman deserving of respect and protection, but as a convenient vault waiting to be looted. "So I am supposed to let him steal an elderly woman's future to pay for his crimes?" I asked, my tone dropping to a whisper. "You are asking me to hand over the keys to a man who fakes drug interventions and bankrupts his own mother." Diane stood up, her face twisting from desperation into a sudden, ugly anger. She hated hearing the unvarnished truth. People who live in a state of financial denial despise the person holding the mirror. "You are so cold, Irina," she spat, grabbing her designer handbag from the console. "You have always been a calculating robot. You sit in your pristine apartment and look down on us. You possess zero empathy for your own blood. You look at human beings like we are just entries on a spreadsheet." I accepted the insult without flinching. "If you were a spreadsheet mother, you would be flagged for severe fiscal negligence," I replied. "I will not step down. I will not sign anything. I am going to protect Beatrice from both of you." Diane yanked the front door open. The autumn draft rushed into the entryway. She paused on the threshold, her knuckles white around the handle of her bag. "You think holding that piece of paper makes you untouchable?" she yelled, her voice echoing down the quiet corridor. "You think you can just freeze him out by being stubborn? He does not need you to step aside anymore. He submitted the bridge loan application this morning. He used the Naperville house as collateral." She slammed the door, shutting me inside the quiet condo. The echo of the heavy wood hitting the frame rang in my ears. I stood frozen in the entryway, staring at the brass deadbolt. A bridge loan application. Harrison was not waiting to gain control of the liquid cash in the trust accounts. He was actively attempting to borrow against the physical equity of my grandmother's primary residence. If that loan processed and he defaulted, the shadow lenders would own the roof over Beatrice's head. The timeline had just accelerated from a threat of future theft to an active, ongoing robbery. I needed to move faster than the speed of his panic. I stood in the narrow entryway staring at the brass deadbolt long after my mother's footsteps faded down the corridor. The revelation regarding the bridge loan hovered in the air like a physical threat. A loan application utilizing the Naperville house as collateral meant Harrison had forged our grandmother's signature on federal banking documents. It was no longer a theoretical scheme. He was actively attempting to encumber her primary residence. I reached into my pocket, retrieving my cellular phone. I needed to call Beatrice immediately to warn her that her property deed was currently sitting on a predatory financier's desk. Before my thumb could swipe across the glass screen, the intercom buzzer mounted on the drywall let out a harsh, piercing ring. The sudden noise sliced through the heavy silence of the condominium. I walked over and pressed the audio receiver button, expecting to hear the lobby concierge announcing a courier delivery. Instead, a crisp, familiar tone drifted through the static-laden speaker. "Let us up, Irina," the voice commanded. "It is entirely too drafty in this vestibule, and I have brought guests." My breath caught in my throat. It was Beatrice. I pressed the electronic release, unlocking the downstairs security doors. I paced the length of my living room while waiting for the elevator to ascend. My mind scrambled to anticipate the situation. If Harrison had already visited her, she might be arriving to demand answers. I mentally prepared to outline the forensic drug screening and the corporate sabotage. I opened my front door just as the elevator carriage chimed at the end of the hall. Beatrice stepped onto the carpeted runner. She wore a pristine camel-colored wool coat, her silver hair perfectly swept back and pinned. She did not look like a frail octogenarian manipulated by a fabricated crisis. She walked with the posture of a reigning monarch inspecting a newly conquered territory. Flanking her were two individuals I had never seen before. One was a tall man in his late 50s carrying a battered leather briefcase. The other was a younger woman clutching a canvas tote bag. Watching my grandmother stride down the corridor, the imposing angle of her shoulders triggered a profound realization. Harrison had made a fatal miscalculation. He viewed Beatrice as a soft target because he only knew her as a grandmother who baked holiday pastries and wrote generous birthday checks. He had never bothered to learn the history of the woman whose wealth he was trying to steal. My memory shifted, pulling forward a story my late grandfather used to tell with deep reverence. It was the winter of 1978. Beatrice was a young widow. Her husband had passed away suddenly from a cardiac event, leaving behind a highly lucrative industrial manufacturing firm. Within a week of the funeral, his 3 male business partners called an emergency board meeting. They assumed the grieving housewife would be easily intimidated. They slid a lowball buyout offer across a mahogany table, explaining, in condescending tones, that the logistics of corporate governance were far too complex for a mother to navigate. Beatrice had not cried. She had not raised her voice. She had opened a leather portfolio and methodically distributed copies of the corporate charter. While her husband lay in the hospital, she had spent 3 sleepless nights auditing the company ledgers. She had quietly acquired the proxy voting rights of every minority shareholder. Sitting in that smoke-filled boardroom, surrounded by men trying to seize her assets, she calmly informed them that she now held the controlling interest. She fired the senior partner on the spot and dissolved the buyout offer. She destroyed their hostile takeover, using nothing but superior paperwork and an iron spine. That was the woman Harrison thought he could outsmart with a few fake tears and a forged banking application. Beatrice crossed the threshold of my apartment, stepping onto the hardwood floor. She unbuttoned her wool coat and handed it to me without a word. She surveyed my immaculate living space, nodding once in approval, before turning her sharp gray eyes toward my face. "Your brother paid me a visit yesterday evening," she said. Her tone was smooth, devoid of any panic or confusion. He sat on my floral sofa, buried his face in his hands, and wept. "He told me you had lost your mind. He claimed you were pawning your dining room furniture to purchase illegal narcotics, and that I needed to sign my accounts over to him immediately to save the family legacy." I stood holding her heavy coat, letting the sheer audacity of his performance settle over me. "I am so sorry, Beatrice," I began, preparing to offer my defense. She held up a single, manicured hand, silencing me instantly. "Do not apologize for the behavior of a fool, Irina," she instructed. "It insults my intelligence. He believes because my skin is wrinkled, my brain has turned to ash. He thinks I cannot spot a sloppy con when it is sitting on my own upholstery." She walked over to my kitchen island. The man with the briefcase and the woman with the tote bag followed, standing quietly near the edge of the marble counter. Beatrice reached into her handbag and withdrew a thick, heavy dossier bound in dark blue cardstock. She dropped it onto the island. The dense thud of the paper hitting the stone surface resonated through the room. The symbolism was stark and undeniable. Less than 24 hours ago, Harrison had slid a glossy, flimsy rehabilitation brochure across a dining room table. His packet was an empty prop designed to manufacture an illusion. Beatrice's blue folder was the exact opposite. It possessed physical weight. It contained foundational truth, verifiable ledgers, and absolute ruin for anyone caught on the wrong side of its clauses. I watched his eyes dart around my parlor. Beatrice continued, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "A man telling the truth looks you in the eye. A man drowning in debt looks at the exit." I smiled at him, patted his knee, and told him I needed the night to pray on such a difficult decision. Then I locked the deadbolt and called my attorney. She gestured toward the two individuals standing by the counter. "This is Dr. Eris Thorne, my primary care physician," she said, indicating the tall man. "And this is Jane, a mobile notary public commissioned by the state of Illinois." I looked at the doctor and the notary, the strategic brilliance of the maneuver washing over me. "I am amending my estate directives immediately," Beatrice announced. "I am stripping Harrison of his secondary proxy status and removing him from the inheritance trust entirely. I refuse to let a desperate amateur squander the capital I spent 5 decades building. You are now the sole, absolute authority over every asset I possess." The relief was profound, but short-lived. Dr. Thorne stepped forward, unlatching his battered briefcase. He reached inside and extracted a small digital audio recorder, setting it gently next to the blue folder on the marble island. "Drafting the document is only half the battle." "Irina," the doctor said, his expression serious and clinical, "your brother has already demonstrated a willingness to fabricate medical emergencies. The moment he realizes he has been severed from the financial accounts, he will inevitably challenge the legality of this newly minted authorization. He will march into a courtroom and claim your grandmother was suffering from cognitive decline when she signed it." Dr. Thorne pressed the red circular button on the side of the device. A small LED light began to pulse, casting a faint crimson glow against the dark stone counter. "To make this transition bulletproof, we cannot simply stamp a piece of paper," the physician explained. "We need to establish her mental capacity on the record right now. We are going to build a fortress around this signature before the ink even has a chance to dry." The crimson light on the audio device blinked in a steady, hypnotic rhythm against the dark marble of my kitchen island. I stood back, letting the professionals dictate the pace of the room. In corporate compliance, you learn very quickly that the strength of an audit relies entirely on the independent credibility of the auditor. I could not be the one asking the questions. The answers had to be elicited by a licensed medical expert acting within his official capacity. Dr. Thorne cleared his throat and leaned closer to the internal microphone. He stated his full name, his medical credentials, and the current date and time. He identified the location as my private residence in Chicago, Illinois. He then turned his attention to my grandmother. "Please state your full legal name and your date of birth for the record," the physician instructed, his tone slipping into a formal clinical register. Beatrice folded her hands, resting them lightly on the edge of the blue dossier. Her posture was impeccable. "Beatrice Evelyn Cook," she replied, her voice crisp and unwavering. "Born October the 12th, 1942. I need to ask you a series of standard cognitive questions, Beatrice," Dr. Thorne continued. "Can you tell me the current day of the week, the month, and the year?" She provided the temporal details without a fraction of a second of hesitation. "I am going to give you 3 words to remember," he said. "Apple, table, penny. Please repeat them back to me." "Apple, table, penny," she echoed. "Now I would like you to count backward from 100 by 7s, he instructed, picking up a notepad to track her responses. 90, 380, 679, 72, 65. She recited the numerical sequence flowing from her lips with the steady cadence of a metronome. She did not pause to calculate. She delivered the subtraction with flawless precision. The physician nodded, making a brief notation on his pad. "What were those 3 words I asked you to remember earlier?" "Apple, table, penny," she answered, offering him a polite yet razor-sharp smile. "Are we finished with the parlor tricks, Eris, or would you like me to draw a clock face indicating 10 minutes past 11? Dr. Thorne chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Your cognitive function is exemplary, Beatrice. You are fully oriented to person, place, and time. Now we must establish your explicit intent regarding these legal documents. Can you explain in your own words what you are preparing to sign today?" The warmth vanished from my grandmother's face, replaced by a cold, formidable resolve. She looked directly at the recording device. "I am executing a permanent revocation of the durable power of attorney currently held in a secondary capacity by my grandson, Harrison Cook. She stated the words, striking the air like a gavel. I am stripping him of all legal authority over my healthcare directives, my real estate holdings, and my financial trusts. I am transferring sole and exclusive proxy authority to my granddaughter, Irina Cook. Can you explain your reasoning for this sudden alteration? Dr. Thorne asked, prompting her to place the motive on the permanent record. Beatrice leaned forward, the silver pins in her hair catching the overhead lighting. My grandson is currently facing imminent financial ruin, she explained, detailing the corporate collapse with ruthless accuracy. He has mismanaged his logistics software company into the ground. He owes a sum of $300,000 to unregulated, predatory financiers. In a desperate attempt to access my estate capital, he orchestrated a fraudulent intervention yesterday evening. He falsely accused Irina of severe substance abuse, hoping to manipulate me into signing over my liquid assets to save her. She paused, letting the sheer gravity of the accusation settle into the digital recording. I am 81 years old, she continued, her voice dropping an octave. I am not senile. I recognize extortion when it is sitting in my living room. I am making this change to protect my legacy from a desperate thief. I understand the full legal ramifications of this document, and I am signing it under my own free will, free from any external coercion. Dr. Thorne reached over and pressed the stop button on the recorder. The pulsing crimson light went dark. The trap was set. Harrison would eventually march into a probate court waving his tailored suit and his feigned concern, demanding a judge declare his grandmother unfit. And the judge would press play on that audio file. The court would hear a woman operating at the height of her intellectual powers, dismantling her grandson's fraud with surgical precision. It was an unassailable legal artifact. Jane, the mobile notary, stepped forward from the edge of the counter. She requested Beatrice's government-issued identification. She inspected the holographic watermarks on the driver's license and recorded the serial numbers into her official leather-bound journal. She unfastened the thick blue cardstock of the dossier, spreading the final signature pages flat against the marble island. Please sign your name exactly as it appears on the printed line, Jane instructed, handing over a heavy black fountain pen. Beatrice took the pen. The metal nib scratched against the thick paper, a sharp, rhythmic sound that filled the quiet kitchen. She signed the revocation clauses. She signed the primary proxy transfer. She initialed every single rider and addendum. When she finished, Jane took the paperwork. She signed her own name, certifying the identity and the sound mind of the principal signatory. Then she retrieved her brass embossing seal from her canvas tote bag. She clamped the heavy metal jaws over the bottom of the page. The loud, metallic crunch of the stamp crimping the paper felt like a vault door slamming shut. The transfer of power was complete. I was now the sole legal shield standing between my grandmother and my brother. Just as Jane began packing her supplies into her tote bag, a sharp double chime echoed from my leather purse resting on a nearby chair. I walked over and pulled my cellular phone from the outer pocket. A push notification glowed across the lock screen. It was an encrypted email from the Independent Forensic Toxicology Laboratory. They had expedited the analysis. I utilized my biometric scanner to unlock the device and opened the secure portal attachment. The official laboratory header displayed across the top of the digital document. I scrolled down past the chain of custody verification to the final analytical results. Every single panel read negative. There were 0 traces of opiates, amphetamines, barbiturates, or any synthetic chemical compounds in my biological ledger. It was a notarized scientific certification of absolute sobriety, covering the past 90 days. I looked up from the screen holding the phone toward the kitchen island. The forensic results have arrived, I announced, my voice steady despite the rush of analytical triumph. The 12-panel hair and urine screening is completely negative. Beatrice's eyes narrowed, the strategic brilliance of her mind calculating the next optimal move. Aris, she said, turning to the physician, turn the recording device back on. Dr. Thorne did not question the directive. He reached out and pressed the red button. The crimson light resumed its steady, hypnotic pulse. Edina, please hand your cellular device to my physician, Beatrice instructed. I walked over and placed the phone on the marble counter, sliding the illuminated screen toward Dr. Thorne. Eris, please read the document currently displayed on that screen into the official record, Beatrice commanded. The physician adjusted his reading glasses and leaned over the digital report. I am currently examining a forensic toxicology analysis originating from an independent certified medical laboratory, he began, his clinical voice, immortalizing the data. The patient listed is Irina Cook. The biological samples were submitted at 10 o'clock this morning under strict federal chain of custody protocols. He scrolled down the screen, interpreting the dense medical data for the audio file. I am reviewing the comprehensive gas chromatography and mass spectrometry results. The panels for every major illicit substance are universally negative. As a licensed medical professional, I can officially state for the record that there is zero empirical evidence of substance abuse. This document confirms absolute extended sobriety. Dr. Thorne stopped the recording for the second time. We had just created an impenetrable dual shield. On a single audio file, we possessed the irrefutable proof of my grandmother's sharp mental capacity and the forensic medical destruction of my brother's primary lie. If Harrison tried to claim I was an addict manipulating an elderly woman, the court would be presented with a recorded physician disproving both allegations simultaneously. The fortress was fully constructed. Jane handed the sealed blue dossier to Beatrice. The notary and the physician offered their quiet professional farewells and exited the condominium, leaving my grandmother and I alone in the kitchen. Beatrice picked up the heavy blue folder and extended it toward me. I took it, feeling the dense weight of the cardstock against my palms. She reached into her handbag one final time and withdrew a crisp, single-page document, sliding it across the marble surface. It was a printed statement from her primary financial institution. I looked at the banking ledger, then up at her sharp gray eyes. Now, Irina, she said, her tone shifting from the warmth of a grandmother back to the cold authority of a chief executive. Take this newly executed authorization directly to my bank branch and lock the vault. Harrison owes his creditors by the end of the week. His 72 hours are almost up. The heavy blue folder sat on the passenger seat of my sedan, anchoring the space like a brick of solid lead. I merged onto the westbound expressway, leaving the dense Chicago skyline in the rearview mirror. The afternoon traffic flowed in a steady, continuous stream, but my internal clock ticked at a frantic, unforgiving pace. 72 hours. That was the timeline dictated by the public lien. Harrison was operating under the crushing weight of a shadow lender deadline. Men who issue unregulated bridge loans outside the bounds of federal banking oversight do not send polite collection letters. They seize physical assets. They foreclose on properties. They break people. The wealth management branch was located in a standalone brick building in the suburbs, surrounded by manicured hedges and tinted windows. I parked the car, grabbed the thick cardstock envelope, and walked through the double glass doors. The interior possessed the hushed, reverent atmosphere typical of high-net-worth financial institutions. Thick wool carpets absorbed the sound of footsteps. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive stale coffee. I bypassed the standard teller line and approached the frosted glass partition of the executive suites. I requested an immediate audience with Thomas Sterling, the senior portfolio director assigned to my grandmother's primary trusts. The receptionist noted my name and quickly ushered me into a corner office. Thomas stood up from his mahogany desk as I walked into the room. He was a seasoned banker with graying temples, wearing a meticulously tailored navy suit. His shoulders carried a distinct, visible tension. He looked like a man who had spent his entire morning trying to defuse an active explosive. "Please sit down, Irina," he said, gesturing toward a leather guest chair. "I am profoundly relieved to see you today." I sat down and placed the blue folder onto the center of his glass desk. "I am executing a permanent administrative override on Beatrice Cook's entire financial portfolio," I informed him, keeping my tone analytical and detached. "I am instituting a global freeze on all external transfers and revoking all secondary proxy authorizations." Thomas opened the blue cardstock. He examined the fresh notary seal, the crimped paper, and the attached physician addendum confirming cognitive capacity. A long, heavy sigh escaped his lungs. The tension drained from his posture, leaving behind a stark, professional exhaustion. "This revocation is ironclad," he murmured, tracing the embossed seal with his index finger. He closed the folder and looked across the desk, his expression hardening. "Your arrival is incredibly timely, Irina. We had a severe security incident in this branch earlier today." I kept my hands folded in my lap, refusing to interrupt. In compliance auditing, you learn that silence encourages people to hand over the missing pieces of a puzzle. "Your brother Harrison was sitting in that exact chair 2 hours ago," Thomas explained. His face was flushed, and he was sweating straight through his dress shirt. He bypassed the standard appointment protocols and demanded an immediate audience. He possessed an old secondary proxy authorization form dated 5 years ago. He demanded we execute a $50,000 international wire transfer. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline hit my bloodstream. "An international wire?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely flat. Thomas nodded, turning back to his keyboard to pull up the flagged transaction record. He requested the funds be routed to an offshore cryptocurrency exchange located in the Cayman Islands. He claimed Beatrice was suffering a severe, sudden medical emergency. He said he needed untraceable, liquid capital to secure experimental, private health care for her. It was an absurd narrative. Standard medical facilities do not accept offshore digital tokens. I knew the old proxy document carried a strict daily transfer limit, Thomas continued. I also knew Beatrice would never authorize a blind offshore transaction of that nature. I initiated a mandatory 24-hour fraud review hold, simply to stall him. Harrison became highly erratic. He shouted at my staff, threatened to have my banking license revoked, and stormed out of the building. "He is desperate, Irina. Revoke his profile immediately," I instructed. "Scrub his credentials from the primary system. Flag his biometric data and alert your internal fraud prevention team. If he attempts to access these accounts by phone or in person, he is to be denied and escorted off the premises by armed security." Thomas typed rapidly, executing the lockout commands. "The system is secured," he confirmed. "I am overriding the pending wire request and locking the vault." He paused, his fingers hovering over the mouse. "There is something else you need to see." He rotated his flat-screen monitor toward me. He expanded a scanned image of the transfer authorization Harrison had submitted to the bank. "This is the signature page he provided to justify the $50,000 release," Thomas explained. I leaned forward, studying the illuminated screen. The digital scan displayed my grandmother's printed name at the bottom of the form. But the handwriting was entirely wrong. Beatrice possesses a fluid, elegant cursive, honed by decades of writing physical letters. The ink on this page was dark, cheap blue. The strokes were jagged and rushed. The pressure applied to the pen was so intense it had visibly scored the paper, creating dark, physical grooves in the signature line. The tip of the pen had nearly torn through the fiber of the page. I stared at the jagged blue ink. It was the exact same cheap plastic pen Harrison had been clicking at the dining room table the night before. His knuckles white, his thumbs snapping the mechanism in raw, unadulterated panic. He had not just attempted to leverage an outdated proxy document. He had crossed the legal threshold from a civil familial dispute into an active felony. He had committed undeniable, blatant forgery on a federal banking document. "I need a physical hard copy of that authorization form," I said, my voice dropping to a sharp whisper. "I need it printed and certified by your branch right now. It is documentary evidence of attempted wire fraud." Thomas nodded, tapping the print command on his keyboard. "I will have the head teller stamp the copy with our official branch seal," he assured me. "It will stand up in any courtroom." I sat back in the leather chair, watching the laser printer whir to life in the corner of the office. The final pieces of my brother's unraveling were slotting into place. He had failed to secure the bridge loan against the Naperville house. He had failed to freeze my career and destroy my compliance license. He had failed to drain the trust. He was out of options, out of time, and cornered by dangerous creditors who wanted their money. He was a man falling from a great height, reaching for anything to break his descent. Before Thomas could hand me the stamped forgery, my cellular phone began to vibrate inside my purse. The device buzzed against the leather lining, creating a low, urgent hum in the quiet office. I reached inside and pulled the phone out. The screen illuminated, displaying an incoming call from Hector, the head doorman at my condominium building. Hector is a retired police officer. He does not make phone calls during the middle of a shift unless a situation has escalated beyond his control. I pressed the green accept button and brought the receiver to my ear. "Ms. Cook," Hector said, his usually calm voice laced with genuine alarm. "Yes, Hector," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "Is there an issue at the property?" "You need to return to the building immediately," Hector instructed, the sound of distant shouting echoing through the phone speaker. "Your brother is standing in the main lobby. He is making a scene, demanding we let him up to your unit, and he has completely lost his mind." The printed forgery sat heavy in my leather bag, a tangible anchor against the rising tide of chaos. I ended the call with Hector the doorman and navigated the late afternoon traffic back toward the city. The sun had begun to sink, casting long, jagged shadows across the Chicago pavement. I understood the psychology driving my brother's public meltdown. Harrison had received the notification from the offshore exchange that his wire transfer had been halted. The shadow lenders were breathing down his neck, waiting for the $50,000 deposit. Faced with a locked vault and a ticking clock, he abandoned any pretense of strategy. He reverted to brute force intimidation. I pulled my sedan into the underground parking structure of my building. I did not rush. I walked to the elevator with a deliberate, measured stride. When you engage with a cornered, erratic individual, matching their manic energy only validates their behavior. You have to become a void. You let their panic echo off your silence until they exhaust themselves. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the expansive marble lobby of my condominium complex. The space is usually a sanctuary of quiet luxury, filled with soft ambient lighting and polite murmurs. Today, it looked like a crime scene waiting for the police tape. Harrison stood in the center of the geometric floor pattern. His tailored suit jacket was unbuttoned, the expensive silk tie pulled loose and askew around his collar. The polished facade of the successful tech visionary had completely evaporated. He was pacing wildly, gesturing with both hands while shouting at Hector, the doorman, who stood stoically behind the mahogany concierge desk. Several of my neighbors had gathered near the mailroom, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and deep discomfort. They were watching a man unravel in real time. "I need the spare key to her unit," Harrison bellowed, slamming his palm flat against the marble desk. The sharp crack echoed against the high ceiling. "She is a severe liability. She is actively using illegal narcotics and hoarding stolen property inside that apartment. I am her next of kin. You are interfering with a medical intervention." I stepped off the elevator and walked across the lobby. I did not raise my voice. I did not tell him to calm down. I simply stopped walking when I was exactly 10 feet away from him. "Harrison," I said. My voice was pitched at a low conversational volume, but it cut through his shouting with surgical precision. He spun around. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated with raw, unadulterated fear. A thin line of sweat tracked down his temple. He looked at my crisp blazer, my steady posture, and the leather bag hanging from my shoulder. He was desperate for a reaction. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to cry, defending my honor in front of my neighbors so he could point a finger and call me hysterical. "Where is the money, Irina?" he demanded, taking a sudden, aggressive step forward. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I crossed my arms over my chest, locking my feet into a solid stance. Hector, the doorman, reached beneath the desk, resting his hand on the security panic button. "You froze the accounts." He spat the words rushing out in a frantic, venomous stream. "You locked me out of the trust. You think you are so brilliant sitting in your pristine little condo managing the spreadsheets. You are killing this family. Our mother is going to lose her house because of your stubborn, calculating greed." I let the insult hang in the air. I let the neighbors hear his confession. He was openly admitting that our mother's shelter was tied directly to his own financial negligence. The picture of the concerned brother trying to save his addict sister was disintegrating right in front of an audience. You forged a signature on a federal banking document at 2 o'clock this afternoon, Harrison, I replied, my tone clinical and detached. I possess a certified stamped copy of the authorization form. The ink you used nearly tore the paper. The blood drained from his face, leaving a pale, sickly pallor behind. The sudden introduction of hard, verifiable evidence struck him like a physical blow. He realized I was not just blocking his access, I was actively documenting his felonies. For a fraction of a second, I saw the genuine terror of a man realizing he was going to prison. But narcissists do not surrender when confronted with their own crimes. They double down. They construct an alternate reality and demand everyone else live inside it. Harrison let out a sharp, hollow laugh. The sound was wild, scraping against the walls of the lobby. He reached inside his unbuttoned suit jacket, plunging his hand into the inner breast pocket. He withdrew a thick legal document stapled at the corner. The thick white paper contrasted sharply against his dark suit. "You think a branch manager handing you a piece of paper stops me?" he sneered, waving the document in the air like a weapon. "You think you can just hide behind your little compliance audits while I lose everything?" He took another step forward, closing the distance between us. His breath smelled of stale coffee and panic. "I did not go to the bank to beg them to reopen the vault, Irina," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, serrated whisper. "I bypassed the bank. I went straight to the county courthouse." He threw the document onto the marble floor. It landed at my feet with a heavy thud. "I just filed an emergency petition in probate court," he announced, a cruel, manic smile stretching across his face. "I submitted a sworn affidavit requesting an immediate external guardianship over Beatrice. I am having our grandmother declared mentally incompetent tomorrow morning." The neighbors in the lobby shifted, murmuring in low, shocked tones. Filing an emergency guardianship petition is the nuclear option in family law. It strips an individual of their fundamental human rights, transferring their autonomy to a state-appointed guardian. "And when I stand in front of that judge tomorrow," Harrison continued, his volume rising again, "I am going to testify under oath that you used your position as an addict to manipulate a senile 81-year-old woman into signing fraudulent papers. I will claim you are draining her accounts to feed your habit. I will bury your compliance license in the dirt." He stared at me, his eyes burning with the destructive intensity of a man with nothing left to lose. "Let us see your precious little paperwork stop a sitting judge," he spat. He turned around and stormed out of the building, pushing through the revolving glass doors. The autumn wind rushed into the lobby, lifting the edge of the legal document resting on the marble floor. I looked down at the petition. Harrison believed he had trapped me. He believed dragging this fight into a public courtroom would force me to surrender rather than face the humiliation of defending my sobriety on the public record. He had initiated the ultimate legal warfare. But as I bent down to pick up the staple-bound papers, a cold, profound realization settled over me. He had not trapped me. He had just voluntarily walked onto a battlefield where the only ammunition that mattered was verifiable truth. He was demanding a hearing relying entirely on a fabricated narrative, while I held a forensic toxicology report, a recorded physician statement, and a stamped forgery. He was rushing blindly toward his own execution. The crumpled emergency petition felt heavy in my hands as I walked out of the condominium lobby. I did not return to my apartment to dwell on my brother's unhinged performance. I walked straight to the parking garage, started my sedan, and navigated the evening gridlock toward the downtown legal district. I needed to see Sarah. Sarah is my grandmother's retained elder law attorney. She operates out of a corner office located on the 34th floor of a high-rise overlooking the Chicago River. She is a woman in her late 50s who wears tailored gray suits and views family disputes through the dispassionate lens of a seasoned prosecutor. She has spent 3 decades watching greedy relatives try to siphon assets from vulnerable seniors. She knows every trick, every fabricated medical claim, and every hollow threat. I bypassed the reception desk and stepped into her spacious office. The room smelled of polished oak and old legal volumes. Sarah sat behind her desk reviewing a deposition transcript. She looked up, removing her reading glasses as I placed the wrinkled petition onto her pristine blotter. "Harrison just served me in the lobby of my building," I announced, taking a seat in the leather chair opposite her. "He is seeking an emergency external guardianship. The hearing is scheduled for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." Sarah picked up the document. Her eyes scanned the dense legal boilerplate, digesting the specific statutes Harrison had cited. A slight frown formed at the edge of her mouth. "He is alleging severe cognitive decline on Beatrice's part and active substance abuse on yours," she summarized. "He is asking a sitting judge to strip your grandmother of her fundamental civil liberties and appoint him as the sole conservator of the estate." She placed the petition back onto the desk, folding her hands over the papers. "Under normal circumstances, Irina, my immediate advice would be to file a motion for a continuance. Most families panic when faced with an emergency guardianship hearing. They beg the court for extra time to gather medical records and secure character witnesses. They try to delay the proceedings to avoid the public humiliation of airing their private grievances on the official record." I met her steady gaze, holding the silence for a brief moment. "We do not require extra time, Sarah," I replied. "We are going to court tomorrow morning." A sharp glint of approval flashed in the attorney's eyes. Sarah understood the strategic advantage we held. The concept of dramatic irony rarely manifests so perfectly in real life. Harrison was blindly charging into a courtroom, believing he held the element of surprise. He assumed I was scrambling, desperate, and unarmed. He did not realize he was walking onto a battlefield carrying empty weapons. "If we delay the hearing, Harrison remains an active threat," I explained, outlining the logic. "He will continue to harass the bank. He will attempt to secure another bridge loan. He will continue to poison my professional reputation. We have to neutralize him permanently." Sarah nodded, a tight, calculating smile appearing on her face. "If he takes the witness stand tomorrow and testifies under oath that Beatrice is senile and you are impaired, he is committing flagrant perjury," she articulated. "If we stop the hearing today, we only prevent a civil dispute. If we let him testify tomorrow, we can hand him over for criminal prosecution. We are going to let him construct his own trap." We spent the next 3 hours transforming her office into a staging ground for a legal execution. We did not prepare a standard defensive posture. We did not draft long emotional statements or gather letters of support from family friends. We relied entirely on hard, irrefutable evidence. Sarah retrieved a box of heavy, dark blue binders from her supply closet. We sat at her conference table, hole-punching documents and sorting the verified artifacts of my brother's impending ruin. We built 3 distinct dossiers. Binder 1 contained the biological ledger. We printed the forensic toxicology analysis on high-quality legal paper. I placed the chain of custody certification right at the front, followed by the comprehensive gas chromatography results. It was the scientific destruction of his primary extortion attempt. Binder 2 held the medical and legal shield. We included the newly executed power of attorney bearing the fresh notary seal. Beside it, we inserted a transcribed physical copy of the cognitive assessment conducted by Dr. Thorne. We placed the small digital audio recorder containing Beatrice's flawless vocal testimony into a clear plastic evidence sleeve and fastened it to the inside cover. This binder alone would dismantle the guardianship petition before the judge even finished reading the opening paragraphs. Binder 3 was the most dangerous compilation. This folder contained the criminal act. We placed the sworn affidavit from the suburban branch manager detailing Harrison's frantic behavior at the financial institution. Behind the affidavit, we inserted the stamped, certified copy of the forged wire transfer authorization. The jagged, cheap blue ink scored into the paper stood out as undeniable proof of attempted theft. I snapped the metal rings of the third binder shut. The sharp metallic click echoed in the quiet office, signaling the end of our preparation. We stacked the 3 pristine blue folders into a neat column. We had distilled months of familial rot and desperate fraud into 3 distinct chapters of evidence. We were not preparing to defend a case. We were preparing a guillotine. I left Sarah's office long after the sun had set, driving back to my neighborhood under the glow of the streetlights. The city felt remarkably calm. I entered my condominium, locked the door, and changed into comfortable clothes. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sat at my kitchen island, opening my laptop to review my corporate emails. An unfamiliar message sat at the top of my personal inbox. The sender address belonged to a boutique family law firm located in the downtown Loop. I clicked the subject line. It was an urgent communication from the attorney representing Harrison in the impending probate matter. I read the text illuminating the dark kitchen. The opposing counsel was attempting to initiate a rapid 11th-hour negotiation. The email stated that Harrison was willing to withdraw the emergency guardianship petition immediately if I agreed to a binding settlement. He proposed a 50-50 division of proxy control over Beatrice's estate trusts. I stared at the screen, deciphering the underlying subtext. Harrison had likely lied to his own legal representation, claiming he possessed actual proof of my alleged addiction. As the court date approached, his lawyer must have demanded to see the evidence. Realizing his client was empty-handed, the attorney was panicking, attempting to mitigate the risk by offering a quiet compromise. They wanted to avoid the scrutiny of a judge. They wanted to settle the dispute in the shadows. A compromise with a thief is just a delayed robbery. Sharing control of my grandmother's assets with a man who forges bank documents to appease shadow lenders was not a viable option. I placed my teacup onto the marble counter. I did not consult Sarah. I did not deliberate over the potential fallout or worry about my mother's tears. I clicked the reply button, opening a blank digital canvas. I typed a single, solitary word. No. I pressed send, closing the laptop lid. The digital chime confirmed the transmission of the message. The final exit route was officially closed. Harrison would have to face the judge in the morning. The single-word reply vanished into the digital ether, finalizing the trajectory of the following morning. I did not attempt to sleep. Instead, I picked up my car keys and navigated the deserted nighttime expressways toward the western suburbs. The silence inside the sedan offered a necessary buffer between the frantic maneuvering of the afternoon and the profound finality of the impending courtroom battle. I pulled into the curved driveway of my grandmother's property in Naperville. The neighborhood was enveloped in a quiet, affluent stillness. Beatrice's residence, a sprawling, traditional brick home, sat back from the street. The porch lights burned bright and steady, casting long, warm beams across the manicured lawn. I parked near the garage and walked up the front steps, feeling the dense weight of the impending dawn settling over my shoulders. I unlocked the heavy oak door using my spare key. The interior of the house smelled of polished wood, subtle lavender, and the comforting scent of old books. Beatrice was sitting in the formal sitting room located off the main hallway. She wore a simple cashmere cardigan draped over a silk blouse, her posture as rigid and unyielding as the antique mahogany chair she occupied. A silver tea service rested on the low glass table between us, emitting faint tendrils of steam. She did not ask me if I had received the legal petition. She already knew the machinery was in motion. She simply lifted the ornate silver teapot and poured a second cup, passing it across the glass surface. He filed the emergency guardianship motion this afternoon. I confirmed, taking a seat on the floral sofa opposite her. The hearing is scheduled for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning at the Cook County Courthouse. Sarah and I have assembled the evidentiary binders. We are fully prepared to dismantle his entire narrative on the public record. Beatrice stirred a small measure of honey into her cup. The silver spoon chimed softly against the delicate china. She looked out the large bay window, staring into the dark expanse of the front yard. We did not engage in dramatic emotional declarations. We did not discuss the concept of forgiveness or mourn the abstract idea of family loyalty. We discussed the cold, stark tragedy of unchecked entitlement. I knew about the reverse mortgage arena, she said, her voice quiet, but stripped of any pity. I have known for nearly 6 months. Your mother possesses many traits, but discretion regarding her financial anxiety is not one of them. She started making oblique remarks about equity and market volatility during Sunday dinners. I pulled the public property records to verify my suspicions. I held the warm teacup between my palms, absorbing the heat. "You knew she had leveraged her own shelter to fund his software company?" I asked. Beatrice nodded, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. I watched her tie herself to the anchor of his delusion. She confirmed, "It is a painful spectacle. Observing your own child enable her son into bankruptcy. But compassion must be tethered to logic, otherwise it morphs into self-destruction. If I had intervened and paid off the initial seed funding, Harrison would not have learned a single lesson. He would have simply returned to the well, demanding more capital the next time his arrogance outpaced his revenue." She set her cup down on the saucer, looking directly into my eyes. "I will not sink a structurally sound vessel simply to rescue a leaking one, Irina. My late husband and I built this estate through decades of relentless, grueling labor. We survived recessions, market crashes, and hostile takeovers. I refuse to let an entitled amateur dismantle my legacy because he lacks the discipline to run a solvent business." The emotional weight of her statement settled heavily into the quiet room. Setting firm boundaries against blood relatives carries a profound internal cost. Society conditions us to believe that family requires endless sacrifice. We are taught to absorb the damage caused by siblings or parents under the guise of unconditional love. But Beatrice understood the toxic reality of that paradigm. Allowing a thief to empty your accounts does not save the thief. It merely creates two victims. The ledger of the Cook family was irrevocably broken. There would be no tearful reconciliations in the hallway of the courthouse. There would be no sudden epiphanies or heartfelt apologies. The damage Harrison and Diane had inflicted was permanent. They had traded trust for panic and weaponized the legal system to steal what they could not earn. Beatrice leaned across the low glass table. She reached out and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was cool and thin, the veins mapping the passage of 81 years, but her grip possessed an undeniable, formidable strength. "You have my spine, Irina," she said, her voice dropping to a low, resonant register. "You do not panic when the room catches fire. You locate the exit, and you execute the plan. Tomorrow morning, you are going to stand in that courtroom, and you are going to show that judge exactly who we are." I held her gaze, absorbing the rare, explicit transmission of profound respect. "I will protect this house, Beatrice," I promised. "I will not let him touch a single asset." I stayed in the quiet house for another hour, watching the digital clock on the mantelpiece tick past midnight. The stillness of the Naperville suburbs offered a final, brief sanctuary before the chaos of the city resumed. Eventually, I gathered my belongings, kissed my grandmother on the cheek, and walked back out to my vehicle. I navigated the empty highways back to my condominium. The Chicago skyline glowed against the dark horizon, a jagged silhouette of concrete and glass. I parked in the underground structure and rode the elevator up to my floor. My apartment felt hollow, stripped of its usual comforting warmth. I placed my keys on the kitchen counter and picked up my cellular phone to set an early alarm. The screen illuminated, revealing 3 missed calls and a newly delivered voicemail. The caller identification displayed my mother's mobile number. I pressed the playback icon, holding the device to my ear. Diane's voice spilled through the speaker, trembling with a frantic desperation. "Irina, please listen to me," she pleaded, the audio clipping slightly from the sheer volume of her panic. "You cannot go to the courthouse tomorrow morning. Harrison has hired an aggressive litigation attorney. He has secured witnesses who are prepared to testify regarding your alleged erratic behavior. They are going to paint you as a volatile addict in front of the judge." She paused, a ragged sob echoing through the digital recording. "He is going to humiliate you on the public record, Irina. Please just withdraw your objection. Let him take the temporary proxy. I am begging you to save yourself from this embarrassment." I lowered the phone, staring at the dark screen. Diane was still clinging to the illusion of control. She believed the threat of public humiliation would finally break my resolve. She assumed I possessed the same fragile ego that governed her and Harrison. She did not realize that I had spent the entire day gathering the exact instruments required to dismantle their entire fabricated reality. I did not delete the voicemail. I saved the audio file, preserving it as the final artifact of an enabler trying to protect a predator. I placed the phone into my leather bag alongside the 3 pristine blue binders. I picked up my car keys and turned toward the door. The waiting was over. It was time. The morning sky over Chicago was a bruised purple, giving way to a cold gray light as I navigated the dense rush-hour traffic toward the downtown legal district. The Cook County Courthouse is a monolithic structure of steel and glass designed to make the individual feel incredibly small. It imposes a sense of rigid authority before you even step through the revolving doors. I parked my sedan in the subterranean garage and walked toward the main entrance carrying my leather bag. The air inside the building possessed a distinct, sterile scent. It was a sharp mixture of industrial floor wax, oxidized metal from the security scanners, and the faint, dusty odor of aging paper files. I placed my bag containing the 3 blue binders onto the conveyor belt. I watched the black rectangular shape slide through the imaging machine. The security officer, staring at the monitor, did not flinch. He had no idea he was processing the precise instruments of a financial execution. I retrieved my belongings and rode the crowded elevator up to the probate division on the 12th floor. The hallway outside the courtrooms was a chaotic theater of human distress. Lawyers huddled with anxious clients exchanging hushed, frantic whispers. Sarah was waiting for me near a set of frosted glass windows, her tailored gray suit acting as a visual anchor in the turbulent corridor. Beside her stood Beatrice, wearing the exact same pristine camel coat from the previous evening. My grandmother did not look like a vulnerable senior citizen preparing to defend her mental competency. She looked like a corporate chairman preparing to terminate a fraudulent executive. We did not exchange nervous chatter. Small talk is a symptom of anxiety. We walked down the polished linoleum corridor and pushed open the heavy wooden doors of courtroom number 4. The interior of the space was paneled in dark, stained oak. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low mechanical hum, casting a flat, shadowless glare across the room. I looked across the center aisle. Harrison sat at the petitioner's table. He had dressed meticulously for his performance. He wore a bespoke navy suit, a crisp white collar, and a muted silk tie. He leaned back in his leather chair, attempting to project the relaxed confidence of a wealthy, concerned savior stepping in to rescue his family. But I audit human behavior for a living, and I noticed the subtle physiological tells. His left foot tapped a frantic, irregular rhythm against the carpeted floor. He continuously adjusted his silver cufflinks, pulling the fabric down over his wrists in a repetitive, soothing motion. His confidence was a thin veneer painted over profound terror. Diane sat in the first row of the public gallery, directly behind him. She was already weeping. She clutched a crumpled tissue in her hands, dabbing at the corners of her eyes. When Beatrice and I walked down the center aisle, Diane physically recoiled. She shifted her gaze toward the blank wooden wall, refusing to make eye contact with her own mother. The shame radiating from her posture was palpable. She knew she was participating in a profound betrayal, but she lacked the courage to halt the momentum. She was entirely tethered to her son's sinking ship. Sarah directed us to the respondents' table. I sat on the right, Beatrice took the middle seat, and Sarah positioned herself on the left. I unzipped my leather bag and carefully extracted the 3 dense blue binders. I placed them onto the scarred wooden surface, aligning the edges with geometric precision. The textured covers felt cool and solid beneath my fingertips. The heavy door behind the judicial bench swung open. The bailiff instructed the room to rise. Judge Caldwell took his seat. He was an older man with sharp features and a strict, unyielding demeanor that suggested he possessed zero tolerance for frivolous litigation. He adjusted his microphone and formally called the docket number. Harrison's attorney, a man named Richard Vance, stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket and stepped toward the center podium. Richard was a theatrical litigator. He understood that probate hearings often hinged on emotional narratives rather than hard forensic data. He began his opening statement with a practiced solemnity, lowering his head to project deep sorrow. "Your Honor, we are here today to prevent an escalating tragedy," Richard announced, his voice echoing off the oak panels. "My client, Harrison Cook, sits before you as a desperate grandson, trying to save his family from ruin." Richard pointed a dramatic finger toward our table. He proceeded to paint a picture of me that was entirely unrecognizable. He described a highly successful compliance analyst who had secretly descended into severe substance abuse. He claimed my hidden addiction had spiraled so far out of control that I was actively isolating our 81-year-old grandmother. He told the judge I was draining her estate trusts to fund a dangerous underground lifestyle, pawning furniture and liquidating assets. Then Richard pivoted his attack toward Beatrice. He lowered his voice, adopting a tone of patronizing sympathy. He described her as a woman suffering from advanced cognitive decline. He claimed she was easily manipulated, confused by modern financial instruments, and entirely dependent on my toxic influence. He insisted that Beatrice did not possess the mental capacity to understand she was being robbed. He concluded his speech by formally requesting the court grant an immediate emergency guardianship, transferring all proxy authority to Harrison to protect the remaining assets from my alleged destruction. I sat perfectly still. I did not shake my head in denial. I did not scoff or whisper frantically to my lawyer. I kept my face entirely blank, presenting a smooth, impenetrable mask. The urge to defend yourself when someone lies about your character in a public forum is a powerful biological instinct. But reacting emotionally in a courtroom only provides the opposing counsel with ammunition. It validates their premise that you are volatile. I let Richard spin his elaborate web. I let him build a fragile, towering house of cards right in front of the judge. He was establishing the parameters of his own client's perjury. Richard finished his impassioned monologue and returned to his seat next to Harrison. Harrison offered his lawyer a solemn, appreciative nod, playing his role of the grieving brother to perfection. The courtroom fell silent. The air felt heavy, thick with the lingering echo of the severe accusations. Judge Caldwell shifted his gaze from the petitioner's table over to us. His expression was stern, his eyes narrowing as he evaluated my calm demeanor. He folded his hands atop a stack of legal briefs, assessing the situation. "Counsel," Judge Caldwell said, addressing Sarah, his voice carrying the crushing weight of judicial authority. "Your client is facing extremely serious allegations. This court does not take claims of elder exploitation or active substance abuse lightly. How do you respond?" Sarah did not stand up to deliver a theatrical counter-argument. She did not raise her voice to match Richard's dramatic pitch. She simply reached out, placed her hand flat against the first crisp blue folder, and slid it across the heavy oak table. Sarah stood up, smoothing the front of her tailored gray suit jacket. She did not carry a legal pad to the podium. She did not require any written notes to navigate the battlefield we had designed. She simply picked up the first blue binder from our table and opened the cover. The crisp sound of the heavy cardstock parting echoed in the silent courtroom. "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice steady and carrying a clinical precision. "The petitioner has levied a severe accusation regarding my client's sobriety. He claims Irina Cook is actively spiraling through a dangerous illicit addiction. He utilized this specific narrative to justify filing an emergency ex parte motion disrupting the court's docket to save a supposedly vulnerable senior citizen." Sarah extracted a thick stack of papers from the metal rings of the binder. She handed the documents to the bailiff, who walked the short distance to the elevated judicial bench. The officer placed the primary stack in front of Judge Caldwell. He then turned and handed a duplicate set to Richard Vance at the opposing table. "What you are currently reviewing is a comprehensive forensic toxicology analysis," Sarah explained, keeping her pacing deliberate and unhurried. It was conducted by an independent certified medical laboratory. The biological samples were collected under strict federal chain of custody protocols. Judge Caldwell picked up the report. He adjusted his reading glasses, scanning the official header, the laboratory credentials, and the timestamps. "I direct the court's attention to the chronological data," Sarah continued. The petitioner ambushed my client with his fabricated medical crisis at 7 o'clock on Sunday evening. The forensic samples yielding this report were submitted at 10 o'clock the following morning, less than 15 hours later. I watched Richard Vance from the corner of my eye. A seasoned litigator knows how to read a room, but more importantly, a seasoned litigator knows how to read opposing counsel. Richard looked down at the copy resting on his table. His eyes darted across the printed negative results for opiates, amphetamines, and every other synthetic compound listed on the 12-panel array. The color began to drain from his face, leaving a sickly gray pallor. He realized in real time that his client had lied to him. Harrison had sent him into a federal courtroom armed with a story that could be scientifically disproven by a standard blood test. This document certifies 90 days of uninterrupted sobriety. Sarah stated, driving the final nail into the narrative. There is zero empirical evidence of substance abuse. The entire foundation of the petitioner's emergency motion is a calculated fiction. Judge Caldwell lowered the papers. The neutral, evaluating expression he had maintained throughout the opening arguments vanished. It was replaced by a rigid, terrifying stillness. A judge relies on the integrity of the sworn affidavits presented to his court. When a citizen files a petition under penalty of perjury, alleging an immediate crisis, they are invoking the heaviest machinery the state possesses. To weaponize that machinery using a blatant lie is an insult to the bench. Judge Caldwell turned his piercing gaze toward the petitioner's table. He looked directly at Harrison. Mr. Vance, the judge, said, his voice dropping into a low, resonant register that carried the unmistakable weight of judicial fury. I am looking at a pristine forensic ledger that categorically disproves your client's primary claim. Would you care to explain why an emergency petition was filed in my court based on an easily verifiable falsehood? Richard opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. He stammered, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He had no defense prepared because he had assumed the lie was safe. Harrison felt the trap closing around him. He saw his expensive attorney floundering under the glare of the judge. Panic overrode his practiced facade. Liars rarely surrender when their primary deception is exposed. They simply pivot, hoping a secondary illusion will distract from the first. Harrison jumped out of his leather chair, interrupting his own legal counsel. "Fine," he blurted out, his voice cracking with desperate, uneven pitch. "Maybe she is clean right now. Maybe she faked the test. But that does not change the core issue, Your Honor. My grandmother is suffering from severe dementia." He pointed a shaking finger toward our table, his chest heaving as he abandoned the initial strategy entirely. "She does not know what she is doing," Harrison insisted, the words rushing out in a frantic flood. "She is 81 years old. She cannot manage a complex financial trust. She signs things without reading them. She needs a state-appointed conservator immediately to protect the remaining capital before her cognitive deficit ruins our family." I did not flinch at the sudden outburst. I turned my head and offered Sarah a single, subtle nod. Sarah closed the first blue binder and placed it aside. She reached for the second folder resting on our oak table. She opened it with the same deliberate calm. "Your Honor," Sarah said, speaking over Harrison's frantic declarations, "the petitioner is now pivoting to challenge the mental competency of Beatrice Cook. We anticipated this tactical shift." Sarah withdrew a clear plastic evidence sleeve containing a small digital USB drive. Beneath the sleeve sat a thick printed transcript and a sworn medical affidavit. The bailiff stepped forward, collecting the items and transferring them to the judicial bench. "My client Beatrice Cook is not suffering from cognitive decline," Sarah articulated, outlining the evidence. "What you possess in that printed transcript is a rigorous mental capacity assessment conducted yesterday afternoon by Dr. Eris Thorne, a licensed geriatric physician. The USB drive contains the original, unedited audio file of that examination." Harrison froze. His hand dropped back to his side. The manic energy fueling his outburst evaporated, leaving him stranded in the center of the silent courtroom. He stared at the plastic evidence sleeve sitting on the judge's desk, the reality of his miscalculation finally penetrating his panic. I encouraged the court to read page 4 of the transcript, Sarah suggested, her tone remaining clinical and detached. Dr. Thorne asks Beatrice Cook to explain her current financial standing. Judge Caldwell flipped the pages of the transcript. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the rustle of stiff paper. The judge read the transcribed words. He read my grandmother explicitly detailing Harrison's failing logistics company. He read her reciting the exact numerical value of the lien filed by the shadow lenders. He read her clinical, precise dissection of his extortion attempt. The judge looked up from the document, his jaw set in a hard, unforgiving line. He looked at Harrison, who was now visibly trembling, a sheen of nervous sweat coating his forehead. Before the judge could issue a reprimand, Beatrice shifted in her wooden chair. My grandmother had sat in perfect silence for the entire duration of the hearing. She had absorbed the insults to her intellect and the attacks on her sanity without a single change in her posture. Now, she decided it was time to speak. She placed her hands flat on the table and leaned forward, bypassing the microphones, bypassing the lawyers, and addressing the bench directly. "I am 81 years old, Your Honor," she stated, her voice clear, cutting through the heavy air like a sharpened blade. "I am not dead. I am not senile. I manage my own taxes and I audit my own quarterly returns." She turned her head, locking her sharp gray eyes onto Harrison. "My grandson is simply upset that I refuse to fund his bankruptcy," Beatrice declared, exposing the raw, unvarnished truth to the public record. "He owes dangerous people a significant sum of money, and he believed he could use this courtroom to bully an old woman into opening her vault." Judge Caldwell leaned far over the heavy oak bench, his posture towering over the room. The air pressure in the court seemed to drop. The judge had heard enough. He had watched a young man attempt to utilize the legal system as a crowbar to crack open an estate trust. He realized he was not presiding over a family dispute. He was presiding over a crime scene. "Mr. Cook," the judge said, his voice quiet but laced with lethal intent. "You filed a sworn petition under penalty of perjury based on deliberate, calculated falsehoods. You have wasted the resources of this court and attempted to strip a highly competent citizen of her civil rights. Give me one single reason I should not hold you in criminal contempt this very second." Harrison opened his mouth, but he had run out of lies. He looked back at his mother in the gallery, begging for an intervention. Diane buried her face in her hands, weeping silently, unable to halt the destruction. I reached out and touched Sarah's sleeve. The judge was furious, ready to dismiss the case and sanction my brother. But a dismissal was not enough. A sanction would only send Harrison back onto the street, desperate and angry. I looked at my attorney and gestured toward the third blue binder sitting on the table. It was time to pull the lever on the guillotine. The absolute silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Harrison stood frozen at the petitioner's table, staring up at the furious expression carved into Judge Caldwell's face. The reality of his position finally breached the fortress of his arrogance. He had walked into the room believing he was the architect of a flawless legal maneuver. Now he realized he was standing on a trap door, and the judge held the lever. Committing perjury in a civil hearing carries severe consequences, including massive financial sanctions and the immediate loss of credibility. Richard Vance, his seasoned attorney, recognized the imminent danger. A lawyer cannot knowingly allow a client to perpetuate a fraud upon the court. Richard stood up hastily, buttoning his suit jacket, adjusting his posture to project a desperate professional contrition. "Your Honor," Richard interrupted, his voice stripped of its previous theatrical timbre. "It appears there has been a profound miscommunication regarding the foundational facts of this case. Given the new evidence presented by the respondents, we formally request to withdraw our emergency guardianship petition without prejudice. We will step away from these proceedings immediately." It was the classic retreat of a defeated bully. Harrison wanted to throw a smoke bomb and vanish out the back door. He assumed he could simply erase the lawsuit and return to his desperate scramble for capital, hoping to find another soft target before his 72-hour deadline expired. But I had not spent my entire professional career analyzing risk to allow a compromised asset to simply walk away. If Harrison left the courthouse as a free man, he would remain a desperate man. Desperate men eventually resort to physical violence or darker coercion when the legal avenues close. He needed to be permanently neutralized. I looked at Sarah. My attorney did not require a verbal instruction. She understood the ultimate objective. Sarah placed her hand firmly atop the third blue binder. She did not slide it across the table. She opened the cover, the sharp crack echoing through the quiet space. "Your Honor," Sarah stated, her voice echoing with a cold, lethal authority. "The respondents object to the withdrawal of this petition. We are not simply defending against a frivolous civil motion. We are formally initiating a countersuit for elder abuse and active financial fraud." The air in the courtroom seemed to freeze. A countersuit introduced in the middle of an emergency probate hearing is an incredibly aggressive maneuver. It changes the dynamic from a defensive posture into an active prosecution. Judge Caldwell leaned back in his leather chair, folding his hands, evaluating the sudden escalation. "Proceed, counsel," the judge commanded. Sarah extracted the final stack of documents from the metal rings. She handed them to the bailiff, who delivered the paperwork to the bench. "Your Honor," Sarah explained, her pacing deliberate, ensuring every word landed with maximum impact. "You are holding a sworn affidavit executed yesterday afternoon by Thomas Sterling, the senior portfolio director at Beatrice Cook's primary financial institution." Richard Vance looked at his client. Harrison had turned the color of ash. He clutched the edge of the wooden table, his knuckles white, his breathing shallow and rapid. He knew exactly what was inside that third folder. Attached to that affidavit, Sarah continued, is a certified stamped copy of a wire transfer authorization form. 48 hours ago, the petitioner entered that suburban bank branch. He bypassed the standard protocols and presented an outdated secondary proxy document. He demanded the bank execute an immediate $50,000 international wire transfer, routing the funds to an unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchange in the Cayman Islands. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. The few spectators sitting in the wooden pews shifted, absorbing the sheer audacity of the scheme. Attempting to siphon $50,000 into an untraceable digital wallet elevated the situation from a messy family dispute to a sophisticated federal crime. When the bank manager initiated a mandatory fraud review, the petitioner became highly erratic and fled the premises, Sarah stated. But he left behind the authorization form. Judge Caldwell flipped to the second page of the packet. He stared at the printed document, observing the official banking stamps and the date codes. "I direct the court's attention to the signature line at the bottom of that page," Sarah instructed. The petitioner forged Beatrice Cook's signature on a federal banking document. The ink used was a cheap ballpoint pen. The physical pressure applied during the forgery was so intense it visibly scored the paper. It is an amateur, desperate fabrication executed by a man facing imminent insolvency. The judge scrutinized the jagged, dark blue ink. The visual evidence was undeniable. It lacked the fluid grace of my grandmother's natural handwriting. It was the jagged, desperate scrawl of a man drowning in his own panic. Judge Caldwell lowered the papers. He looked across the courtroom, staring directly at Harrison. The judicial fury had distilled into a cold, clinical, absolute disgust. The judge realized the entire guardianship petition was nothing more than a smokescreen. Harrison had filed the lawsuit hoping the threat of public humiliation would force me to unlock the frozen bank accounts before the forgery was discovered. He had weaponized the probate court to facilitate a robbery. "Mr. Cook," the judge said, his voice quiet and deadly. "You did not come to my courtroom seeking justice. You came here attempting to use my gavel to break open a vault you could not pick yourself." Harrison opened his mouth, but his voice failed him. He turned away from the bench, seeking the only remaining source of validation he possessed. He looked back toward the gallery, searching for his mother. "Mom," he mouthed the silent plea, frantic and hollow. Diane sat in the first row, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her lap. She had mortgaged her own retirement home to fund his delusion. She had stood in my hallway and begged me to let him steal from an 81-year-old woman. But confronted with the stark, undeniable reality of a forged federal document, the illusion finally shattered. Enabling a failing entrepreneur is a moral failing. Aiding and abetting a felon is a prison sentence. Diane physically recoiled. She raised her hands, covering her face, refusing to meet his eyes. She severed the tether, letting him sink alone. Judge Caldwell picked up his wooden gavel. The sound of the heavy mallet striking the sounding block cracked through the courtroom like a rifle shot. The emergency guardianship petition filed by the petitioner is denied with prejudice, the judge ruled, his voice ringing with absolute finality. This court finds zero merit in the allegations of cognitive decline or substance abuse. The proxy authority held by Irina Cook remains ironclad. The judge did not stop there. He gathered the stamped bank forgery and the sworn affidavit, aligning the edges of the paper. He handed the packet down to the bailiff, standing at attention near the bench. Furthermore, Judge Caldwell announced, I am ordering this court to impound these specific financial documents. Bailiff, you will forward this file directly to the state attorney's office for immediate criminal review. I am recommending a formal indictment for attempted wire fraud and the forgery of federal banking instruments. The gavel struck the block a second time, terminating the session. Harrison stood rooted to the carpeted floor. He was completely ruined. His business was insolvent. His shadow lenders were waiting. His mother had abandoned him. And now he was facing the terrifying reality of a criminal prosecution. His entire loud, visionary empire had collapsed under the sheer weight of its own hubris. He had tried to outsmart the system using empty promises and manufactured panic. I sat at the respondents' table remaining perfectly composed. I did not gloat. I did not offer a triumphant smile or utter a sharp parting remark. I simply reached across the scarred wooden surface and began packing my 3 pristine blue binders back into my leather bag. We had executed the audit, we had identified the liability, and we had permanently neutralized the threat. The ledger was finally balanced. We left the courtroom without exchanging a single word with the opposing side. There were no dramatic confrontations in the hallway. Television broadcasts often depict the aftermath of a trial as a loud, chaotic affair filled with bitter screaming matches and pointed fingers. Reality is far more clinical. When a devastating truth is entered into the public record, it extinguishes the oxygen required for an argument. Harrison remained anchored to the petitioner's table, staring at the wood grain as the realization of his criminal exposure paralyzed his limbs. Diane slipped out a side door, vanishing into the labyrinth of the judicial building. I walked to the elevator with Sarah and Beatrice, the quiet hum of the descending carriage serving as the only soundtrack to our victory. We stepped out onto the Chicago pavement, the cold morning air clearing the stagnant scent of the courthouse from our lungs. We parted ways with quiet nods, acknowledging the successful execution of our strategy. I drove straight to my office tower in the financial district. I did not require a temporary leave of absence to recover from the stress. I parked in the subterranean structure, rode the elevator to the executive floor, and walked directly into the Human Resources Department. Marcus Vance and Eleanor Hayes were waiting in the same mahogany conference room. I did not offer a narrative of the morning's events or demand an apology for my suspension. I simply unzipped my leather bag, retrieved the certified negative forensic toxicology report, and placed it onto the polished table. Eleanor reviewed the official stamps, the medical credentials, and the precise time codes. The state regulatory board received the documentation within the hour. My access protocols were reinstated before I even returned to my desk. My professional reputation remained flawless. In the corporate sector, rumors dissipate the moment verifiable data enters the equation. Harrison had attempted to incinerate my career to force a surrender. Instead, he merely provided me with an opportunity to demonstrate my unyielding adherence to strict compliance. The consequences of my brother's hubris unfolded over the next several weeks with a brutal mathematical certainty. The state attorney's office did not ignore the forged wire transfer authorization impounded by Judge Caldwell. Financial crimes involving federal banking institutions rarely escape formal scrutiny. Harrison was formally indicted for attempted wire fraud. The public filing triggered a rapid cascade of ruin across his fragile tech empire. The shadow lenders, realizing their primary target was facing a federal criminal prosecution, moved swiftly to liquidate his remaining collateral. His logistics company was dismantled, sold off for parts to satisfy the predatory debt. The sleek website was taken down. His expensive suits and luxury vehicles could not mask the stark reality of his insolvency. His loud, visionary persona collapsed under the crushing weight of a standard audit. The fallout inevitably reached my mother. The reverse mortgage she had secured to fund his delusion went into default. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on her property. During that turbulent month, my cellular phone would frequently illuminate with incoming calls from Diane's number. I never answered the ringing device. She left long, rambling voicemails, filling the digital storage of my phone with tearful pleas for familial unity. I listened to the first message, sitting alone in my quiet condominium. She claimed she had been blinded by maternal hope. She begged me to forgive her participation in the dining room intervention, insisting that family must always stick together during times of crisis. I pressed the delete icon, erasing the audio file from the server. I understand the precise psychology of an enabler. An apology delivered only after a scheme has failed is not an expression of genuine remorse. It is simply a request for a new life raft. Diane was not sorry that she had attempted to sacrifice my grandmother's future. She was only sorry that the gamble had failed, and she was now facing the financial consequences of her own choices. You cannot build a stable relationship with someone who views your personal boundaries as an obstacle to their comfort. I cleared my inbox, ignoring the subsequent notifications, and focused my energy on the present. Autumn transitioned into a crisp, early winter. I spent my Sunday afternoons visiting Beatrice in Naperville. We sat on the flagstone back patio of her sprawling brick home, wrapped in thick wool blankets, holding ceramic mugs of dark roasted tea. The manicured lawn stretched out toward a line of dormant oak trees, their bare branches tracing sharp lines against the pale sky. The property was entirely safe. The estate trusts were secure, locked behind an ironclad wall of notarized revocation clauses and fresh proxy directives. No desperate relative or predatory lender could touch a single dime of the capital she had spent a lifetime accumulating. We did not spend our afternoons dissecting the trial or analyzing Harrison's impending criminal defense strategy. We discussed the shifting seasons the stock market yields and the quiet peace that follows a necessary excision. The Cook family ledger was permanently altered, but it was finally balanced. The toxic liabilities had been removed, leaving behind a clean, sustainable foundation. Beatrice would look at me across the patio table, her sharp gray eyes reflecting a profound, unspoken gratitude. She knew her legacy was protected by someone who valued steady stability over loud spectacle. My brother spent his entire life operating under the assumption that volume equated to power. He believed that if you talked fast enough, dressed sharp enough, and projected enough manufactured confidence, the world would simply bend to his narrative. He viewed my quiet, analytical nature as a fatal weakness. He assumed a human calculator could never withstand the forceful demands of a charismatic visionary. He failed to comprehend the intrinsic, formidable strength of silence. When you spend your days analyzing risk and mitigating corporate liabilities, you learn a fundamental truth about human conflict. You do not have to outshout a liar. Engaging in a vocal dispute with a manipulator only drags you into their chaotic theater. It forces you to play by their erratic, unpredictable rules. The most effective strategy is to step back, maintain your composure, and let them talk. You let them spin their elaborate fictions. You let them file their emergency petitions and make their grand theatrical speeches. You let them dig their own grave while you, quietly, methodically, mix the cement. You spend your time gathering the forensic toxicology reports, the sworn medical capacity affidavits, and the stamped banking records. You construct a fortress of verifiable facts in the shadows, utilizing the exact bureaucratic systems they assume you are too intimidated to navigate. A name given to you can be slandered, but a reputation you earn and protect with legal paper is forever yours. The truth is not a fragile thing, requiring constant emotional defense or tearful justifications. The truth is a dense, heavy blue binder waiting to be opened in front of a judge. That is my story. A fabricated intervention, a forged banking application, and an 81-year-old grandmother who refused to fund her own destruction. If a loud, entitled person ever attempts to write your story, do not argue with them. Do not waste your breath trying to convince an audience of your innocence or begging an enabler for their support. Just keep your receipts, call a mobile notary, and let them meet the paperwork. Thank you for listening to Revenge Order. If this narrative reminded you to secure your own boundaries against entitled relatives, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment below, hit the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.